Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES horizon and watched the stars through the main screen. 3 years had passed since humans first met the aliens of the Galactic Coalition, and Jake still felt like an outsider in this vast universe. The Coalition had over 200 different species, and they all talked constantly. Their ships filled space with radio waves and quantum signals and telepathic messages that never stopped flowing. Jake's ship was different. The horizon moved through space in complete silence. No radio chatter filled the bridge. No quantum transmissions reached out to other vessels. The only sounds were the quiet hum of engines and the soft beeping of instruments. This was how humans preferred to work. Lisa Hayes sat at the navigation station and checked their course without speaking. She had served with Jake for 5 years and could read his moods without words. Carlos Vega monitored the engine readings from his post and occasionally glanced at Jake with knowing eyes. Sam Parker handled communications but mostly stayed quiet since there was rarely anything to communicate. The Coalition had given humans permission to explore the outer rim sectors, but only with strict rules. Human ships could not enter core systems without escort. They could not approach military installations. They could not interfere with Coalition business. Jake understood the restrictions, even if he didn't like them. Humans were still the new species and many aliens didn't trust them yet. A sharp beep from Sam's station broke the bridge silence. Sam frowned at his instruments and turned to Jake. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress signal. It's coming from the Kepler system about 2 light hours away." Jake moved to look at the readings. The signal was weak, but clearly marked as a Coalition emergency beacon. "What kind of ship?" "Looks like a Zephyrian transport vessel," Sam replied. "They're reporting engine failure and requesting immediate assistance." Lisa checked her star charts and shook her head. "Sir, that system is supposed to be empty. No scheduled traffic through there for another week." Jake studied the data and felt something cold in his stomach. Empty systems were perfect places for pirate attacks. The outer rim had plenty of raiders who targeted isolated ships. "Set course for the signal. Maximum speed." The horizon turned toward the Kepler system and accelerated. Jake didn't need to give more orders. His crew knew what to do. Lisa plotted the fastest route while Carlos pushed the engines to their limits. Sam monitored all frequencies for more information. They worked together like parts of the same machine. 2 hours later, they dropped out of hyperspace near a gas giant and immediately saw the trouble. A large Zephyrian passenger transport hung dead in space with its engines dark. 3 smaller ships circled it like hungry wolves. Jake recognized the raider design immediately. "Pirates," Carlos said quietly. Jake nodded and touched his command console. "Battle stations, silent running." The bridge lights dimmed to red, and all external transmissions stopped. The horizon became a ghost in space. Jake watched the tactical display and counted the enemy ships. 3 raiders against 1 transport. The pirates had already damaged the Zephyrian vessel and were probably preparing to board. Lisa moved the horizon closer without being asked. She used the gas giant's gravity well to mask their approach. Carlos diverted power to weapons and shields. Sam monitored enemy communications and listened to their plans. The pirates were arguing about how to split their prize. They had disabled the transport's engines and were getting ready to cut through the hull. Jake could see escape pods drifting near the damaged ship. The Zephyrians were abandoning their vessel. "Range to targets?" Jake asked quietly. 30,000 kilometers and closing," Lisa answered. Jake studied the enemy positions and made his decision. He didn't need to explain his plan to the crew. They had trained for this kind of situation many times. One look at his face told them everything. The horizon accelerated toward the closest pirate ship. Carlos armed the plasma cannons while Lisa calculated the perfect attack angle. Sam kept monitoring enemy transmissions to make sure they didn't see the human ship coming. At 10,000 kilometers, Jake gave a small nod. Carlos fired the main guns and sent bright plasma bolts into the pirate ship's engines. The raider spun out of control as its power systems failed. Before the other pirates could react, Lisa had already moved the horizon to the next target. The second pirate ship tried to run, but Carlos disabled its hyperdrive with precise shots. The third raider turned to fight. but found itself facing weapons that fired faster and more accurately than anything it had ever seen. In less than 5 minutes, all 3 pirate ships were drifting helplessly in space. Jake opened a channel to the damaged transport. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Morrison of the human ship Horizon. Are you in need of assistance?" The reply came in accented English. "Human ship, yes. We need help. Our engines are destroyed, and we have injured passengers. We'll send repair teams and medical aid," Jake responded. "The pirate threat has been neutralized." For the next 3 hours, the Horizon's crew worked to help the Zephyrians. Carlos led a team that restored basic power to the transport. Sam coordinated with coalition rescue ships that were finally arriving. Lisa helped plot a safe course back to the nearest coalition station. The Zephyrian captain was a tall, blue-skinned alien named Keth Moore who seemed nervous around humans. He thanked Jake multiple times but kept staring at the human crew with worried eyes. "Captain Morrison," Keth Moore said as they prepared to leave, "how did your ship coordinate the attack? We detected no communications between your crew." Jake shrugged. "We didn't need to talk. Everyone knew what to do." "But how is this possible? All civilized species use communication networks during combat operations. We're not like other species," Jake replied simply. As the Horizon prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake noticed that Kethmore was still watching them with fear in his alien eyes. The Zephyrian had seen something that disturbed him deeply, but Jake couldn't understand what it was. The human crew had simply done their job. They had worked together quietly and efficiently to save lives. To Jake, this seemed perfectly normal, but as they jumped away from the Kepler system, he wondered why their silence had frightened the aliens so much. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in her laboratory on Kepler Prime Station and stared at the data streaming across her screens. 6 months had passed since the incident in the Kepler system, and reports about human activities kept flooding into coalition databases. Each report told the same strange story. Humans appeared during emergencies, fought in complete silence, and disappeared before anyone could study their methods. Elena worked as a xenobiologist for the Coalition Research Division, but lately she spent most of her time analyzing human behavior patterns. Her research partner was Mel Taryn, an insectoid scientist from the HiveMind Collective. Mel Taryn had compound eyes that could process data faster than most computers, but even he seemed confused by the human reports. "Look at this incident near the Vega Nebula," Elena said, pointing to her screen. "A human patrol encountered Corathan slavers attacking a refugee convoy. The humans disabled 12 enemy ships in 8 minutes with no detectable communications." Mel Taryn's antennae twitched nervously. "This violates all known principles of tactical coordination. Even my people require constant pheromone exchanges during complex operations." Elena pulled up another file. "Here's the engagement at Proxima Station. Human Marines boarded a hijacked freighter and rescued 40 hostages. Security cameras show them moving through the ship like they shared the same mind." "How do they coordinate without signals?" Mel Taryn asked. "Our instruments detect nothing. No radio waves, no quantum entanglement, no telepathic emanations. It's as if they communicate through empty space." Elena had been asking herself the same question for months. Every major species in the galaxy used some form of detectable communication. The Zephyrians relied on subspace transmissions. The Corathans used bioelectric pulses. The hive minds shared chemical signals. Even the ancient ethereals communicated through quantum fluctuations that could be measured and studied. But humans remained completely silent during combat operations. They coordinated complex maneuvers without exchanging a single detectable signal. Their ships moved in perfect formation while maintaining communication blackouts that would cripple any other species. A priority message appeared on Elena's console from Coalition Defense Command. She opened it and found Admiral Kethvar requesting all available data on human military capabilities. Elena knew Kethvar from his service in the border wars. He was not the type of commander who worried about minor threats. Elena gathered her files and prepared for the briefing. She had documented 17 separate incidents where humans had intervened in crisis situations. The pattern was always identical. Human forces appeared without warning, executed flawless tactical operations, and vanished before coalition reinforcements arrived. The briefing room at Defense Command was filled with high-ranking officers from multiple species. Admiral HFY stood at the front, while holographic displays showed human ship movements throughout Coalition space. Elena recognized the worried expressions on faces that had seen countless battles. Dr. Rodriguez, Admiral HFY said, "Please present your findings on human combat behavior." Elena activated her presentation and began explaining what she had discovered. Human military units operate under complete communication silence during combat operations. They coordinate through methods that our instruments cannot detect or analyze. A Corithan general raised a clawed hand. "Doctor, are you suggesting that humans possess some form of unknown technology?" "No, sir," Elena replied. "I believe their coordination abilities are biological in nature. Humans evolved as pack hunters on their homeworld. They developed sophisticated non-verbal communication methods over millions of years." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. If humans could coordinate military operations without detectable communications, they possessed a significant tactical advantage over every other species in the galaxy. Admiral HFY studied the data projections. "How do we counter an enemy that fights in complete silence?" Elena felt uncomfortable with the word enemy, but continued her briefing. Traditional electronic warfare would be useless against them. Jamming their communications networks would have no effect because they don't use communication networks. Meanwhile, on the Coalition capital world of Nexus Prime, Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner was leading a human diplomatic mission through the most important negotiations in human history. The Coalition Council was debating whether to grant humans full membership status or maintain the current restricted access agreements. Alex sat at the negotiation table with 3 other human diplomats and watched Coalition representatives argue among themselves. The aliens talked constantly, filling the chamber with dozens of different languages and communication methods. The humans remained quiet and listened. Coalition Defense Minister Zar Kol was a massive reptilian creature with scales that changed color based on his emotions. Currently, his scales showed deep red patterns that indicated serious concern. He leaned across the table toward Alex with eyes that reflected millions of years of predatory evolution. "Commander Turner," Zar Kol said in heavily accented English, "my military advisors are troubled by recent reports of human combat operations. They say your people fight like ghosts." Alex met the alien's gaze without flinching. "We fight like humans, Minister. We use the methods that work best for us. But how do you coordinate without communications? This ability seems almost supernatural to our analysts." Alex smiled slightly. "Minister, my species learned to hunt in groups long before we developed radio technology. We became very good at working together without making noise." Zar Kol's scales shifted to darker red. "This ability gives you significant military advantages over Coalition forces." "We prefer peace, Minister," Alex replied calmly. "It's when we're quiet that you should worry." The chamber fell silent as the implications of Alex's words sank in. Coalition species had spent millennia developing advanced communication technologies, but humans had perfected something far more basic and possibly more effective. After the diplomatic session ended, Alex walked through the corridors of the Coalition Council building with his security escort. He could feel alien eyes watching him from every direction. Word of his comment to Minister Zar Kol was already spreading through diplomatic channels. Back on Kepler Prime Station, Elena received an urgent message from Mel Terran. Her research partner had discovered something disturbing in the latest intelligence reports. Human merchant ships were also operating in ways that violated normal space traffic patterns. "Elena, look at these shipping manifests," Mel Terran said when she arrived at his laboratory. "Human cargo vessels are changing course without filing navigation updates. They coordinate convoy movements without standard fleet communications." Elena studied the data and realized that the silent coordination abilities extended beyond military operations. Civilian humans were also working together in ways that other species couldn't understand or predict. "They're not just soldiers," Elena said quietly. "This is how their entire species operates." Mel Terran's compound eyes reflected worry. If humans can coordinate any group activity without detectable communications, they possess capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization. Elena stared at the data and felt a chill run down her spine. The Coalition had welcomed humans as a minor species with primitive technology. But what if humans weren't primitive at all? What if they had evolved something that made conventional military doctrine obsolete? As reports continued flowing in from across Coalition space, one thing became increasingly clear. Humanity's silence was not a weakness or a limitation. It was their greatest strength and possibly the most dangerous capability any species had ever developed. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning, when every Coalition communication network across 3 sectors went dark simultaneously. Admiral Tethmore stood in the command center of Coalition Fleet Headquarters and watched his tactical displays fill with enemy contacts. The Ravager Syndicate had launched the largest coordinated pirate attack in galactic history. Tethmore was a veteran commander from the aquatic Cetarian species who had fought in 17 major campaigns. He had never seen anything like this. The Ravagers were using advanced jamming technology to disrupt quantum communications, subspace transmissions, and even basic radio frequencies. Coalition fleets found themselves scattered and unable to coordinate their response. "Sir, we're receiving fragmented reports from the outer systems," his communications officer reported. "The Ravagers have hit cargo convoys, mining stations, and passenger liners across the entire frontier region." Tethmore studied the tactical display and counted over 300 enemy ships moving in coordinated attack formations. The Ravager Syndicate had somehow acquired military-grade jamming equipment and learned how to use Coalition communication protocols against them. "Status of our fleet response?" Tethmore asked. "Admiral, our ships can't coordinate effective counterattacks. The jamming is too comprehensive. Each vessel is fighting alone." For the first time in his military career, Tethmore felt helpless. Coalition doctrine depended entirely on constant communication between fleet elements. Without their communication networks, Coalition ships became isolated targets instead of coordinated fighting forces. A priority message arrived through hardwired emergency channels. Admiral Morrison of the human 7th Fleet was requesting permission to assist with the crisis. Tethmore knew Morrison by reputation. The human commander was Jake Morrison's father and had served in the Earth Defense Forces before joining the Coalition. "How many ships does Morrison have available?" Tethmore asked. His staff, 12 vessels, sir, all human design with limited firepower compared to our battleships. Tethmore almost refused the offer. 12 small ships couldn't make a significant difference against 300 Ravager vessels, but desperate situations called for desperate measures. "Grant Morrison permission to engage. Coordinate with whatever forces he can reach." The human 7th Fleet arrived in the Altair system where Ravager forces were attacking a major shipping hub. Coalition defenders were fighting in small, scattered groups because their communication networks remained jammed. Admiral Morrison's flagship, the UES Defiance, took position at the center of the battle zone. Morrison stood on his bridge and surveyed the chaos around him. Coalition ships were firing randomly at enemy targets without coordinating their attacks. Ravager forces were exploiting the confusion to attack isolated vessels. The battle was turning into a massacre. "All ships implement Protocol 7, Morrison said quietly into his command communicator. Across the human fleet, captains acknowledged the order and began moving their ships into formation. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led a squadron of fighters from the carrier UES Ranger. Commander Ryan Scott commanded a destroyer group from the UES Vigilant. Each human vessel took its assigned position without exchanging another word. Protocol 7 was a combat doctrine that had been developed during Earth's colonial wars. It allowed human forces to coordinate complex operations while maintaining complete radio silence. Every officer knew their role and could adapt to changing conditions without requiring constant updates. Sarah Kim's fighters swept toward a group of Ravager interceptors that were harassing Coalition cargo ships. She didn't need to tell her pilots what to do. They had trained together for years and could read each other's intentions through subtle changes in flight patterns. The human fighters attacked in perfect synchronization despite maintaining communication blackouts. They used formation flying and visual signals to coordinate their maneuvers. The Ravager pilots found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to share a collective mind. Commander Scott's destroyers moved to engage a Ravager heavy cruiser that was bombarding a coalition defense station. Scott's ships approached from 3 different angles without coordinating their attack through radio transmissions. They used predetermined tactical patterns that every human naval officer had memorized. The Ravager cruiser tried to jam the approaching ships but found nothing to disrupt. The human destroyers continued their attack runs while maintaining perfect coordination. Their weapons fire converged on the enemy vessel's weak points with surgical precision. Coalition forces watched in amazement as the human fleet dismantled Ravager formations that had been winning the battle moments before. The aliens had never seen anything like the way human ships worked together. Each vessel seemed to know exactly what the others were doing without any detectable communication. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical situation and realized that the Ravagers had made a critical error. They had designed their jamming systems to disrupt every known form of galactic communication technology. But humans didn't rely on technology for battlefield coordination. "Signal the coalition forces," Morrison told his communications officer. "Tell them to follow our lead and maintain radio silence." The message went out through hardwired emergency channels to every coalition ship in the system. Admiral Tethmore received the transmission at fleet headquarters and immediately understood what Morrison was attempting. Coalition captains began shutting down their communication systems and watching human ship movements for tactical cues. It was an alien concept for species that had relied on constant chatter for millions of years, but desperate circumstances forced them to try new methods. The battle turned decisively when coalition forces learned to fight like humans. Instead of trying to coordinate through jammed communication networks, they began following visual signals and predetermined tactical patterns. The Ravager advantage disappeared as their jamming technology became useless. Sarah Kim's fighter squadron engaged Ravager bombers that were attacking civilian evacuation ships. Her pilots moved in silent coordination, while coalition fighters learned to copy their formation patterns. The combined force drove off the enemy attack without losing a single friendly vessel. Commander Scott led a mixed human and coalition task force against the Ravager command ship. The alien crew struggled to adapt to silent combat operations, but gradually learned to read human tactical signals. When the attack began, 40 ships from 6 different species moved as a single coordinated unit. The Ravager Syndicate had never faced an enemy that could coordinate without communications. Their entire battle plan depended on disrupting coalition command networks. When the jamming became ineffective, their forces found themselves outmaneuvered by opponents who fought like a unified organism. In 72 hours, human-led forces had systematically destroyed or captured every Ravager vessel in 3 sectors. The pirate syndicate that had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades was completely eliminated. Not a single human ship was lost during the entire campaign. Admiral Tethmore reviewed the battle reports with growing amazement and fear. Coalition forces had won a decisive victory, but only because they had learned to fight like humans. The implications were staggering. Dr. Elena Rodriguez received priority access to all combat data from the Ravager War. She studied the recordings of human fleet movements and finally understood what made them so effective. Humans didn't just coordinate. Without communications, they had evolved to fight as a single collective entity while maintaining individual initiative. "They're not using technology at all," Elena told Meltaran as they analyzed the data. "Human combat coordination is purely biological. It's the result of millions of years of evolution as pack hunters." Meltaran's compound eyes studied the tactical recordings. "This gives them advantages that no other species possesses. They can fight effectively under conditions that would paralyze any other military force." Elena nodded grimly. The galaxy had just learned that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their ships. It was their ability to work together, in perfect silence while every other species depended on constant communication. The Ravager War had ended, but its lessons would reshape galactic military doctrine forever. The Deep Space Monitoring Station at the Galactic Rim detected them first. Massive objects moving between the stars at impossible speeds, leaving trails of devastation wherever they passed. Admiral Tethmore stood in Coalition Fleet Command and watched the sensor readings with growing horror. The Void Swarm had arrived. The mechanical intelligence that had consumed 3 neighboring galaxies was now approaching Coalition space. Initial contact attempts had failed because the swarm didn't communicate in any recognizable way. It simply consumed everything in its path and converted organic matter into more machines. Fleet Admiral, we're receiving reports from our forward observation posts, his communications officer announced. The swarm has destroyed the Kepler defense grid and is moving toward inhabited systems. Tethmore studied the tactical displays and felt despair creeping into his mind. The Void Swarm consisted of millions of mechanical entities that could process information at quantum speeds. They adapted to every weapon used against them and learned from every tactic employed by organic defenders. Coalition fleets had engaged the swarm at 3 separate star systems and suffered catastrophic defeats. The machines could jam communication networks faster than any known technology. They could hack into ship computers and turn coalition weapons against their own forces. Traditional military doctrine was useless against an enemy that thought at light speed. A priority message arrived from Earth. Admiral Marcus Webb was requesting permission to deploy the entire human Grand Fleet to assist with the defense of the galaxy. Tethmore knew that humanity's total military force consisted of only 200 ships. It seemed like a futile gesture against millions of mechanical entities, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Tethmore approved the deployment and hoped that human tactical abilities might provide some advantage against the swarm. The human Grand Fleet assembled at the Galactic Barrier under Admiral Webb's command. Every human military vessel from Earth to the frontier colonies had been called to service. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the escort carrier UES Ranger, while his father led the battle group from the flagship UES Constitution. Webb studied the intelligence reports about Void Swarm capabilities and realized that conventional tactics would be suicide. The machines could intercept and counter any strategy that relied on communication networks. But humans had an advantage that no other species possessed. All fleet commanders, implement Protocol Omega, Webb announced. From this point forward, we maintain complete communication silence. Protocol Omega was humanity's most classified military doctrine. It had been developed during the worst phases of Earth's unification wars, when enemy forces had learned to intercept human communications. Under Protocol Omega, entire fleets could coordinate complex operations without exchanging a single detectable signal. Jake Morrison received the order aboard the UES Ranger and felt his stomach tighten. Protocol Omega meant that the situation was desperate beyond hope. His ship carried 12 fighter squadrons and 4 marine assault companies. Each unit would have to operate independently while maintaining perfect coordination with the rest of the fleet. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led the Ranger's primary fighter wing and had trained extensively for silent operations. Her pilots could coordinate attack patterns through subtle changes in formation flying. They had practiced until these maneuvers became instinctive responses that required no conscious thought. The Void Swarm reached the Arcturus system and immediately began converting the local star's energy output to power its expansion. Coalition forces tried to establish a defensive perimeter, but found their communication networks compromised within minutes. Ships lost contact with Fleet Command and began fighting as isolated units. Then the human fleet arrived. Admiral Webb's ships took positions throughout the system without exchanging any communications. Each vessel knew its role in the overall battle plan through years of training and preparation. The humans began implementing tactics that the Void Swarm couldn't analyze or predict. The mechanical entities tried to jam human communications but found nothing to disrupt. They attempted to hack into human computer systems but discovered that human ships were operating under manual control. Every weapon system and navigation computer was being controlled by human operators who trusted their instincts over automated systems. Sarah, Kim's fighters engaged swarm interceptors in the asteroid belt around Arcturus Prime. Her pilots used formation signals and visual cues to coordinate their attacks. The mechanical enemies tried to process human tactical patterns, but found them incomprehensible. Human behavior seemed random yet produced devastatingly effective results. Jake Morrison led a combined human and coalition task force toward the swarm's primary processing facility. Coalition ships followed human tactical signals because their own communication networks had been completely compromised. Alien crews watched human officers and tried to anticipate their next moves. The breakthrough came when human forces began, teaching coalition crews to fight like humans. Instead of relying on constant communication updates, alien officers learned to watch their teammates and anticipate their actions. The galaxy's most advanced species began using the oldest form of coordination, known to organic life. Admiral Tethmore commanded coalition forces from his flagship and watched human tactics spreading throughout his fleet. Ships that had been paralyzed by communication jamming began working together again. The Void Swarm's greatest advantage was becoming useless. The battle for the galactic barrier lasted 6 days and involved over 10 million vessels from both sides. Human ships served as coordination nodes for massive coalition formations. When communication networks failed, human officers used light signals and formation flying to relay tactical information across entire star systems. Jake Morrison's ship became the focal point for a battle group consisting of vessels from 12 different species. Coalition crews learned to read human body language and facial expressions to understand tactical orders. The ancient art of nonverbal communication became the foundation for galactic military doctrine. The turning point came when human Marines boarded swarm processing ships and disabled their central coordination nodes. The mechanical entities depended on constant data sharing to maintain their collective intelligence. When humans disrupted their networks, individual swarm units became isolated and vulnerable. Sarah Kim led fighter squadrons deep into swarm formations and targeted their command vessels. Her pilots coordinated attacks through methods that the machines couldn't analyze or counter. The mechanical intelligence that had conquered 3 galaxies found itself defeated by tactics it couldn't understand. Admiral Webb coordinated the final assault from the Constitution's bridge without speaking a single word. His staff officers watched his expressions and hand gestures to understand his commands. The human flagship became the silent nerve center for a battle involving millions of ships and trillions of lives. The Void Swarm was finally defeated when its core intelligence matrix was destroyed by a coordinated assault involving human and coalition forces working in perfect silent harmony. The mechanical entities that remained were scattered and powerless without their central coordination system. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was forever changed. The coalition extended full membership to humanity not as junior partners, but as the species whose unique abilities had saved galactic civilization. Human officers were integrated into coalition command structures at every level. Dr. Elena Rodriguez published her final research report on human communication methods, and it became required reading at every military academy in the galaxy. Her conclusion reshaped understanding of tactical coordination throughout known space. In a universe filled with constant chatter, Elena wrote, the species that mastered silence became the one everyone learned to listen to. Human tactical abilities represent the evolution of organic cooperation to its highest form. They coordinate, not through technology but through something far more sophisticated, millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Admiral Webb's final log entry became the motto for the new galactic defense doctrine that combined human and coalition capabilities. We never sought to be feared, he wrote. We only sought to survive. But in a galaxy that forgot the power of silence, our whispers became thunder. The human method of silent coordination was adopted by every coalition species as the foundation for modern military training. Officers learned to read micro-expressions and body language. They practiced coordinated movements until they became instinctive. They discovered that the oldest form of communication was also the most reliable. Jake Morrison was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Galactic Defense Fleet. His ships patrolled the rim systems and watched for threats that might emerge from the cosmic void. The galaxy was safe because humans had taught everyone else how to work together without words. The coalition had learned that humanity's silence was never a limitation or weakness. It was their greatest gift to galactic civilization and the key to survival in a universe filled with dangers that could disrupt any form of technological communication. In the vast silence between the stars, human voices had become the galaxy's strongest defense against the unknown threats that lurked in the cosmic darkness. Director Vithnal stood in the secure briefing room of Coalition intelligence and studied the holographic displays showing human fleet positions throughout known space. 3 months had passed since the Ravager War ended, and the Coalition Security Council was demanding answers about human military capabilities. As head of Coalition intelligence, Vithnal had been tasked with discovering the truth about humanity's silent coordination abilities. Vithnal was a member of the Shadowkin species, known for their natural stealth abilities and analytical minds. His people had served as intelligence operatives for the Coalition for over 2 centuries, but the human problem presented challenges unlike anything he had encountered before. Agent Kolveth, report on your infiltration attempts, Vithnal said to his senior operative. Kolveth was a shapeshifter who could assume the appearance of any humanoid species. She had spent weeks trying to penetrate human military installations without success. Director, human security protocols are unlike anything we've seen. They don't rely on electronic surveillance or communication intercepts. Explain. Human. Guards watch for behavioral patterns rather than scanning for identification codes. They notice when someone moves wrong or looks uncomfortable. Our standard infiltration techniques are useless against them. Vithnal frowned. Every species in the galaxy used technology-based security systems. The idea that humans relied on biological observation seemed primitive yet clearly effective. What about their communication methods during training exercises? That's where it gets strange, sir. We monitored human military drills for weeks. Their units coordinate complex maneuvers without exchanging any detectable signals. They seem to read each other's intentions through micro-expressions and body language. Agent Lisa Carter sat in a Coalition detention cell on the intelligence station at Vega Prime and waited for her interrogation to begin. She had allowed herself to be captured during a reconnaissance mission to provide carefully selected information to Coalition intelligence. Lisa was a human operative trained in psychological warfare and knew exactly what information to reveal. The cell door opened, and Director Vithnal entered with 2 armed guards. The Shadowkin intelligence chief studied Lisa with eyes that had evolved to detect the slightest signs of deception. Lisa met his gaze calmly and waited for him to speak. Agent Carter, you are charged with espionage against the Coalition. However, we are prepared to discuss alternative arrangements if you cooperate with our investigation. Lisa nodded. What do you want to know? How do human military units coordinate without communications? Our scientists believe your people possess some form of unknown technology. Lisa smiled slightly. Director, we don't use technology for battlefield coordination. We use something much older and more reliable. Explain. My species evolved as persistence hunters on Earth. We learned to track prey across vast distances by reading environmental signs and coordinating through subtle visual cues. These abilities are hardwired into our nervous systems. Vithnal's expression showed skepticism. You expect me to believe that human military coordination is based on primitive hunting instincts? Not primitive, Director. Sophisticated. While other species developed communication technologies, humans perfected the art of silent cooperation. Every human child learns to read facial expressions and body language before they can speak. Lisa continued her carefully planned revelation. Human military training emphasizes what we call situational awareness. Soldiers learn to anticipate their teammates' actions by observing micro-movements and breathing patterns. We can coordinate complex operations through methods that your instruments cannot detect. The interrogation continued for hours as Lisa provided selected details about human training methods. She explained how human units practiced coordinated movements until they became instinctive. She described training exercises where soldiers learned to communicate through slight changes in posture or eye movement. Vithnal realized with growing alarm that humans had weaponized abilities that other species took for granted as basic social skills. What Coalition members considered primitive nonverbal communication, humans had refined into sophisticated military doctrine. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison received orders to report to Coalition Security Council chambers for immediate questioning. The council wanted direct testimony from human officers who had participated in the Ravager War. Jake traveled to Nexus Prime accompanied by General Marcus Webb, the senior human military liaison to the Coalition. General Webb was a veteran of Earth's unification wars who understood the political implications of the current situation. He had served in Coalition space for 2 years and knew that many alien species were becoming fearful of human capabilities. The Security Council chamber was a massive amphitheater filled with representatives from over 50 Coalition species. Jake felt hundreds of alien eyes studying him as he took his position at the witness stand. The questions began immediately. "Captain Morrison," said Council Chairman Aldrich Venn, "please describe how your ship coordinated with other human vessels during the battle at Altair Station." Jake chose his words carefully. "Mr. Chairman, we followed standard human fleet doctrine. Each ship knew its role and executed the mission according to our training. But our recordings show no communication signals between your vessels. How did you coordinate your attacks?" "We didn't need to communicate, sir. Human naval officers train extensively in coordinated operations. We learn to read tactical situations and respond appropriately." A Corathan representative leaned forward, aggressively. "Captain, are you claiming that human crews can read each other's minds?" "No, sir. We read each other's actions and intentions through observation and experience. It's similar to how musicians in an orchestra can perform together without constant verbal communication." The comparison seemed to puzzle the alien representatives. Most Coalition species relied heavily on continuous communication, even for simple group activities. The idea that complex military operations could be coordinated through observation alone challenged their fundamental understanding of cooperation. General Webb stepped forward when the questions became more aggressive. "Honored council members, Captain Morrison has answered your questions honestly. Human military coordination methods are based on our evolutionary heritage as social hunters." Chairman Aldrich Venn's crystalline features showed obvious concern. "General Webb, the Security Council requires assurance that human military capabilities do not pose a threat to Coalition stability." Webb's response chilled the chamber. "Mr. Chairman, what you observed during the Ravager War represents our peacetime capabilities. Our actual military doctrine remains classified, but I can assure you that we have no intention of demonstrating it." The implied threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Coalition representatives had seen human peacetime capabilities destroy the most dangerous pirate syndicate in galactic history. The thought of facing their actual military doctrine was terrifying. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the Security Council proceedings from her laboratory on Kepler Prime and finally understood the full implications of her research. Humans weren't just another species with unusual communication methods. They represented a fundamental challenge to Coalition civilization. "Meltaran, look at these biological analyses," Elena said to her research partner. "Human neural patterns show extraordinary development in the brain regions responsible for social coordination and pattern recognition." Meltaran studied the data with growing unease. "Elena, these readings suggest that humans process social information faster and more accurately than any known species. They can predict group behavior with supernatural precision." Elena nodded grimly. "That's why their military coordination seems so effective. They're not just working together. They're anticipating each other's actions before those actions occur." The revelation explained everything that had puzzled Coalition observers about human behavior. Their silent coordination wasn't just a communication method. It was a form of collective intelligence that emerged when humans worked together in groups. As reports from the Security Council hearings spread throughout Coalition space, alien populations began to understand that they were sharing the galaxy with a species unlike any other. Humans had evolved capabilities that made conventional military doctrine obsolete and traditional diplomatic assumptions dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's silence wasn't just their greatest weapon. It was a fundamental aspect of their nature that could reshape the balance of power among the stars.